406.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 411 from 406. My name is Chewie, and that is my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
I am fantastic tonight, man. I feel like we just talked, but I think that's a good thing. I think we need to really plow into 2024 with the intention of getting to that 100th episode. And this is a good start for us. This is because we're only a couple days into the new year at this point.
Yeah, this is super cool. So yeah, we recorded episode 84 on, I believe it was December 27th, and as we sit here tonight, it is January 11th. So yeah, this is I mean, just that alone, being a couple weeks from one episode to the other, we didn't do great the back half of the year of being consistent. So just
Yeah.
just the fact that we're sitting down, I think, is awesome. And I wanted to tell you, I wanted to kind of spring this on you a little bit. I actually, when we got off the last episode, I actually recorded, I don't know, we probably talked for another 20 minutes or so after that episode. And I thought it would be kind of cool to go and not edit that, but just kind of put that out as kind of a bonus podcast. So
That
I don't remember what we talked about. I have no idea, but I have that recording. So
that would be awesome. Yeah, memories get a little fuzzy towards the
yeah.
end of the podcast, which is a nice little perk of getting to listen to ourselves talk. Is that I end up having a few drinks and then kind of forgetting what we talked about. So I listened back to the podcast and I was like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
So since we talked last, Happy New Year. It's 2024. We made it
Same to
into
you.
another one. Did you guys do anything interesting or exciting for New Year's Eve, or just kind of hang out with the girls?
Now we just kind of hung out with
Yeah.
some friends and neighbors, and yeah, New Year's is very different than it was 20 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
we were in bed by 12:05. It
Were you?
was
Yeah.
we the ball dropped, we booted everybody out, and we ran straight to bed. And it was a struggle. Like I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed to admit that it's harder to get myself to stay up late these days. But we had a great time. We have some really fun and great neighbors that we've made friends with over the years, and some other friends that we've met through school, daycare and all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty calm, it was pretty chill. We played some games, watched TV, had a few drinks, had a shit ton of food, and it was fun. How about you guys?
Yeah, we were very low key as well. My oldest son went out to a party, so he wasn't here, and so I had two of my boys here, and then my in-laws came over, and we made fondue for dinner. So we just like had multiple courses. So we did cheese, and then we did the main course and the chocolate, and kind of did the whole thing, and just
Nice.
kind of, yeah, just watched some football and watched some TV and just kind of hung out. It was nice. It was super low key. I think my in-laws left at 12:15 or 12:30, and yeah, it was nice. It was I didn't really want anything else this year. It's been an interesting year, and I was ready to just kind of let it go
Yeah.
and
Right.
just kind of, and just kind of move on. So
Yeah,
yeah, it
lots.
was it was good. Yeah.
Good. Well, that's awesome to hear. So I'm curious. I wanted to ask you a question. It's kind of off script here, but
Yeah.
I was curious because obviously this is a podcast, and you and I probably both listen to a number of podcasts on and off, maybe some religiously, some not. But I'm curious to know, like, what other podcasts do you like to? Do you have regular podcasts that you listen to? And if not, has there been anything you stumbled on lately that you really like? Because I found one that I'm just absolutely head over heels for. It was a short run series I'll talk about, but I wanted to get
Okay.
your perspective on that first.
To answer your question, I do have a couple that I listen to pretty religiously, and then a couple more that I will kind of dip in and out of depending on the episode or depending on the topic. And then I've got a couple others that I will, just kind of snipe, pick and choose. So regular listeners, I listen to Real Coffee with Scott Adams. Scott Adams is the creator of Dilbert, and he
Hmm.
got himself, and he's like, these days he's kind of turned into a political commentator. He got himself into some pretty hot water last year, where he effectively got canceled because he said some what was portrayed as some pretty racist stuff. If you listen to him, he's really not at all. But I get a lot of my kind of political news from him. I listen to Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard
Yes.
and
One of
Conrad
my
Thompson's.
faves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I listen to that. I will listen occasionally to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. I'm not. It's a very similar show to Something to Wrestle. I'm a bigger WWE fan than I am WCW, so that's why I kind of pick and choose that one. I listen to Talk Scary to Me with
Oh, yes.
Daniel Harris and Scott Thompson, and I listen to the Gary Vaynerchuk, which is all about business and marketing and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Those are my regular. And then I will Joe Rogan I will listen to on occasion, just depending on the guest that he's got and what topic he's talking about.
Sure.
Yeah. How about yourself? You said you found something that really kind of piqued your interest?
I did. I found this, it's not new. It's, I think, at least a couple years old at this point. Maybe 2020 is when it came out. I'm not entirely sure, but it's called Whistleblower. And it's basically I think maybe a 10 episode series. It's the story of Tim Donaghy, who is the disgraced referee, the
Oh,
NBA referee that got caught betting on his own games, and basically how deep that whole scandal goes, which I thought was really incredibly interesting. I mean, I've been a basketball fan all my life, and my relationship with the NBA has sort of waned considerably over the years, but I certainly remember this story. I mean, it was the biggest story, the biggest controversy probably to ever hit the NBA. And this podcast, they actually interview Tim Donaghy. They interview Rasheed Wallace, who was a basketball player who had some beef with Donaghy. They interviewed various people who were involved with the case. They interviewed I'm not going to remember all the names, but basically his partner in crime, the one that he was doing all the betting with, because he had a really close buddy who was a bookie. And this is, of course, back I think it was at its height around the early 2000s, before internet gambling and before sports betting was legal in a lot of places. And so the way that they did a lot of the stuff that they did was just really super interesting to me. And then, of course, the scandal broke, or eventually it got to the point where the FBI found out about it, and they were going to use Donaghy as an informant, basically, to try to figure out how big and how wide this thing was. And like within a week of that happening, the story got leaked to the New York Times, and everybody knew about it. And then everybody shut up, so the FBI couldn't use him as an informant. And the FBI, they actually interviewed somebody from the FBI who was highly involved in this case, who's a bit of a recluse, and they had trouble finding him, but he's this well-known FBI agent who like took down the Gambino family and just like all kinds of stuff. And basically his take on the whole thing is that the NBA covered all this up because, what Donaghy had said when he got in trouble was basically, look, yeah, I did all these things, but you should see what's going on behind the doors with the NBA, because they're basically telling the refs what teams to get into the playoffs and into the finals, because it's,
really?
the bigger the markets, the more
Yeah.
money they get with advertising dollars. So it benefits them to get the Lakers in versus teams like the Sacramento Kings. In fact, that was one of the big examples that they talked about. I'm sure you don't remember, and I had to jog my memory too, but in the 2002 Western Conference Finals, it was the Sacramento Kings, which had like Chris Webber and some other players, against the Lakers, which was at that time Shaq and Kobe. But they called like 26 fouls or something obnoxious on the Kings in the fourth quarter alone. And at one point, Kobe Bryant threw his elbow and broke Mike Bibby's nose, and they called a foul on Mike Bibby. And it was just like
I actually remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
it's known to be one of the worst officiated games of all time. And Tim Donaghy, I believe, was reffing that game. And he's come out, that one I might be wrong on. I'm not entirely sure, but basically he said, yeah, I mean, like the NBA will do what they need to do to manufacture the right team getting into the game. And they made a lot of comparisons to professional wrestling. It's like, well, at that point, it's not sport, it's sports entertainment, because they're predetermining the outcome. So I'm getting ready to listen to the last episode of it, and nobody really comes out looking like a good guy, but guys like David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA for a very long time, he passed away in recent years, but the stories that are coming out about him are pretty cruel, pretty vicious in terms of how he strong-armed a lot of people, and how that there were people even above the NBA's level from a government perspective that did not want this case to go to court, that did not want
Oh
Donaghy
wow.
to be able to testify, because if he did, then he would have put the NBA on trial. And they talk a lot about Mark Cuban, who's obviously a very outspoken owner of the Dallas
Hmm.
Mavericks, and because he's had a lot to say about the referees. It doesn't understand why the NBA referees are employed by the NBA. Seems like a bit of a conflict of interest.
Hmm.
So I don't know. That's a very long rambling review, but if you're into that kind of conspiracy stuff, and it doesn't really seem much like a conspiracy, it seems like a flat out. It seems
It
very
happened.
objective.
Yeah.
It did happen, and somehow the NBA swept a lot of their discretions under, or excuse me, a lot of their transgressions under the rug, and never got in trouble for it. Nothing ever came of it.
Wow.
In fact, David Stern, this is the most interesting part of the podcast, in my opinion, was the FBI met with David Stern to sit down and talk about it. And David Stern's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be super cooperative. I'm going to give you guys everything you need. And then less than a week later, David Stern went to all of the media corporations that he had negotiated contracts with for the TV rights, and renewed them for billions of dollars. And they weren't expired yet. They were like a year away from expiring. But as soon as David Stern saw the writing on the wall that the NBA could be in a lot of trouble, he went to all these major networks and renewed all his contracts, because he knew
Wow.
that they couldn't get out of him when this shit, and he didn't disclose any of this. This was before, the Tim Donaghy stuff hit the papers, and before it became public knowledge. So he didn't disclose any of it, and ended up making
Wow.
a hell of a lot of money off of it. So there's a lot of shady stuff going on there. And I just thought it was a really interesting podcast.
Yeah, that is, I mean, you talk about kind of conspiracy theory, like that sort of stuff is right up my alley. I absolutely love that stuff, which is part of the reason that I enjoy some of the podcasts that I do. You mentioned Mark Cuban, ironically enough, so he just sold the Mavericks.
Yeah.
And there is it's funny, one of the podcasts that I listen to has a theory, I guess, that they believe that the reason he did that is because he is kind of the in emergency break glass potential Democratic candidate for president of the United States in
Oh, wow.
2024.
That's crazy.
Yeah, their theory, and actually, it might sound crazy when I relay it, but like if you listen to the kind of like why they get there, they don't believe Joe Biden is going to run for reasons, whether he's old or what have you. They don't believe somebody like Gavin Newsom out of California will run. And the idea is, hey, we need somebody that is, doesn't have a lot of baggage from a political standpoint. And Cuban might be that kind of guy. So I don't know. It would be interesting. It'd be interesting to have an Indiana Hoosier
Yeah.
in the White House. Dude, this is hilarious that, and I could promise our listeners that we did not talk about this because
No.
it's hilarious. Literally an hour before we started recording, I actually reached out to one of the podcasters that I listened to the most from way back in the day, and I was asking them questions, and I actually got for you some rapid fire questions from them. Do you remember the show, the Star Joe's podcast? Did you ever
I
listen to that?
once or twice, but yeah, I am
Okay.
familiar with Star Joe's, but I
Okay.
wasn't as involved with the podcast.
So Star Joe's, and they're still around. They've been going, I mean, maybe God, 10 years, close to 10 years now. I'd have to go back and figure it out. But they
Nice. Good for
basically,
them.
they talk about all things Star Wars, GI Joe, kind of all the properties from that we know and love, Thundercats and Transformers and all this kind of stuff. And they had a list of questions that they would ask every single one of their guests as they would come on.
Hmm.
And I thought it would be kind of cool. I was like, "Hey, do you guys have that list of questions handy?" and I'm going to ask you that list of questions. So I just think that is
Nice.
super ironic that you brought up podcast tonight on it. Literally an hour ago, I was talking to these guys, getting these questions. So these are rapid fire questions. I have not talked to you about this. I'm totally taking you off guard. So this
Nice.
is
I
just kind
love
of
this
like,
shit.
yeah. So this is just kind of like Rorschach test kind of things. Quick answer off the top of your head. There's about 10 of them. Okay.
Hmm.
All right, here we go. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Star Wars, of
Star
course.
Wars. Okay. Autobots or Decepticons?
Autobots.
Autobots. G.I. Joe or Cobra?
Cobra.
Duke or Flint?
I liked Flint better as an action figure, so I'll go with Flint.
Okay. Cake or pie?
Cake or pie?
Cake or
Cake,
pie?
cake.
Cake. Okay.
Yeah,
Hot dog or hamburger?
hamburger.
C3PO or R2D2?
Oh shit. Probably R2D2.
Okay. Masters of the Universe or Thundercats?
Masters of the Universe.
Okay. Cobra Commander or Destro?
Definitely Cobra Commander.
Cobra Commander. Okay. And then the final one is Chewbacca a sidekick or is he a partner?
Yeah. Yes, I think he's a sidekick. I
He's a
would
sidekick.
I would classify him as a sidekick only because he doesn't really have a storyline. I mean, I think in order for them to be partners, they would have to have equitable storylines or
Okay.
equitable cachet within the universe. And I don't think anybody, I mean, it doesn't help that he doesn't speak in a language that
Right.
has ever been translated. So who knows? But I don't know that you could make a series about Chewbacca because he doesn't communicate as fluently as the
Right.
rest of the world, you know, which is ironic because I chose R2D2 over C3PO, but you know, R2D2 is less annoying. C3PO is just a little bitch.
For sure. For
But
sure.
yeah, I mean, rapid fire. That'd be my
Yeah.
answers without
Okay.
thinking too
No,
much
that's
of it.
fair.
Those are cool. I like that though. That's really
Yeah,
fun.
they did, like I said, they would ask the same that same 10 or whatever questions to every single guest that they had on. And I was just like, I was just thinking about that tonight. So I reached out to them and ironically we're talking other podcasts tonight. So that's from Star Joe's. Shout out to Ryan and Chuck. They are the kind of originators of that. They are both local Cleveland guys. I've met both of them, hung out with them.
Nice.
Awesome guys. Yeah, they are super cool. So if you guys are looking for like an 80s themed podcast, Star Joe's is the one to go to.
That's very cool. I
Yeah.
love that.
So, so on to tonight's topic, which I'm going to let you introduce, but I am so excited about this. We were talking before the podcast. I'm shocked that we are 85 episodes in and we haven't done this. It just seems like something we would have done before now.
Yeah, so I texted you earlier and I'm like, dude, I want to podcast tonight. I know we just did this like I guess it was 2 weeks ago at this point, but I don't know. Like I just got a kind of a fire and wanted to kind of have like some fun conversation slash debate over some familiar territory for us. And and you said, yeah, sure, like let's do it, but what are we going to talk about? And which is always my least favorite question because I'm like, ah, crap, what are we going to talk about? Because I don't ever really care. I just want something to talk about. And then it just sort of hit me like a bolt of lightning.
What did you say? A bolt of lightning.
It was why not talk about we haven't done music in a while. So how about we talk about our top 5 favorite soundtracks? This has been the clumsiest segue because we couldn't really go from podcast into soundtracks very smoothly. But for those younger listeners out there who may not know what the hell a soundtrack is, back in the 80s, this used to be the best ways to sort of distribute various types of music to the listener, from the movies that they were a part of. And we sit here in 2024 now, and soundtracks aren't really a thing anymore. I mean, the way that we consume music is very different than we did in the past. You can make your own playlists on your own applications and things like that. So it doesn't translate as well. But back in the day, man, soundtracks meant the world to the music buying audience, in my opinion. And the bigger the movie, the bigger the soundtrack. It seemed like at the time. So I thought, why not just get together and talk about this? And my favorite part of doing these top 5 lists isn't coming up with my top 5. It's seeing how close we are to having a similar list, or to hearing, you know, hearing you or hearing me say something like, "Oh, geez, I didn't even think about that." Like that would totally flew off my radar. Didn't even register. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to do our top 5 favorite soundtracks of all time. Now, there are caveats that we need to call out, and please help me with these if I miss anything. So, I've talked on this podcast about being a devout fan of movie scores. So, artists like John Williams or James Horner or, Jerry Goldsmith, the list goes on. I will listen to a symphonic score from a movie from beginning to end, but that is not what we're talking about tonight. We are specifically talking about movie soundtracks where the majority of the album is comprised of songs, rock songs, rap songs, whatever it is, country songs. It can be anything. They can have orchestral or symphonic or scores on the soundtrack, but they can't be the score. So like Star Wars is a great example, right? We can't say Star Wars for this. There's not a song in Star Wars that doesn't involve a puppet and a band, right? So that's not included. That's not factored into this. Perhaps we could do that at another time, which I would be really geeked out for. But this is really more for albums that had, 10 to 15 songs on them, most of the time with different artists, but not always. And yeah, so that's kind of it. Did I miss anything there though?
No, you didn't. The only other thing that I kind of held myself to, I disqualified soundtracks where, and this is going to sound weird, but hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying, where music was a major part of the movie, and where I tried not to choose soundtracks where it was just a groupings of songs that had already existed like throughout the years. The one that
Okay.
comes to mind is Forrest Gump. I didn't use Forrest Gump
Okay.
because that was effectively a greatest hits of the 60s and 70s.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I will say that there
There's
are,
probably one that'll show up on your list that
yeah.
I disqualified for the same reason, but that was
There are actually
that was,
2 on my list that I
is there?
would put
Okay.
in that category, but I've got some commentary around why I think those albums are important, or
That's
why
fair.
they can be important. But if you didn't put those on, that's also totally fair. I did not put Forrest Gump on mine because I agree, because it just seems like, well, let's just pick the best songs out of the best
Right.
decades. That's not, doesn't really take any effort, and it doesn't really it doesn't improve the quality of the movie just to
Right.
have a bunch of popular songs. I would
Exactly.
much prefer a soundtrack full of songs I've never heard of, but I really love the songs because they remind me of the movie.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, so that's the only caveats. I will say that this list made me feel really old, and you'll understand why in a couple minutes.
do you have any soundtracks on this list that were released after the year 2000?
I do not.
Okay, neither do I.
In fact, with the exception of my honorable mention, which I did get down to 1,
That's tough.
every film on every soundtrack on my list is from a 3-year period.
Can I guess the period?
Sure.
Is it 84, 85, and 86?
It is 84, 85, and 86. Yes, it is.
Okay, we may have some overlap here. That's fair.
So this is why. So okay. So speaking of that, how many? I think we're gonna have 84, 85. I'll put the over under at 2. What do you think? Are we gonna have more than 2
or 2.5? You gotta.
Okay, I'll 2.5 to make it hard. Over under.
Under. I think
under.
we're gonna
so
be
you
under.
think 2?
I think two.
You think one or two? Okay.
I do.
Okay.
Based off, well, I'm cheating a little bit because you already told me your time
Sure.
range.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah,
That's
I
fair.
do think, and even if you hadn't told me that, I think two would have been my guess.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
So before we get started, though, I wanted to
Yeah.
show this to you because I love this, and of course, nobody else can see this, but I'll show it to you. So in my basement, I have a box that I've been carrying around for the last 15 years of my life that has held my ever precious collection of CDs, not just any CDs, but mostly my bootlegs, which hey, that's a whole nother episode, favorite bootlegs. But it's got a lot of my soundtracks in there too. So I went down there today to go look through there just to see if there was anything that sparked my interest. And I don't have anything here that is going to be on my list, but there were some here that I'm like, holy shit, I kind of forgot about these that are actually really good. And I'm somewhat confident they won't appear on your list, but I'm going to go ahead and show them to you because we're on a Zoom right now. But right here is The Secret of My Success.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Which is a fucking great soundtrack. Now, this is not going to be in anybody's top 400.
Anything. Yeah.
But it's got, songs. Well, it's got the title track by Night Ranger, which is one of my favorite fucking Night Ranger songs of all time. Night Ranger, highly underrated. But it's got Pat Benatar on it, who, in my opinion, is one of the greatest female vocalists of all time. Roger Daltrey, and a couple of songs by David Foster, who is a very well-renowned composer and songwriter. And those are orchestral pieces, but great songs on that one. So that's one.
You mentioned Pat Benatar. She turned 71 yesterday.
I fucking love Pat Benatar. I would go anywhere to see her right now. She played at the State Fairgrounds like a year or two ago, and it was a free show, and I couldn't go because I was traveling out of town. I was brokenhearted. She's got some great soundtrack songs, by the way. The album PCU. I don't know if you remember this movie.
Yes.
This album is single-handedly responsible for triggering the love that I have for George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic, because there are some great George Clinton songs on here. I don't know that this is a great soundtrack from top to bottom, but I credit that from bringing George into my life. John Bon Jovi, Young Guns 2.
Nice.
This fucking soundtrack is unbelievable, and I had to really think about whether I wanted to bump something on my list. But this is, Blaze of Glory is super popular, but from beginning to end, this has got a lot of shit on there, and he had a lot of players on this album. He had a lot of people that that participated. Stand By Me. Wow, what a soundtrack. Yeah. This soundtrack introduced me to an entire genre of music, because this movie came out in, when was it? 1986? Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So in 86, I was 10 years old, and I'm hearing songs like Buddy Holly, or bands like Buddy Holly and the Del Vikings and the Coasters and Jerry Lee Lewis and Benny King for the first time ever.
Yeah. Very different.
And this album is one that I will say, I want to find a name for it, but I want to be able to categorize it, because I think it's going to be representative of two other soundtracks on my list. This is an album that the soundtrack came from a movie that took place during this time and featured only songs during that time. Forrest Gump was kind of like that, but not really, because that spanned a lot of decades and such.
Yep.
But like this, Stand By Me came from, I think, the 50s, 60s time frame, and that's where these songs come from. So it's like a genre soundtrack of songs. And so, that, just a couple more and I'll let you start. Let's see. Armageddon, which was amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Had some great Aerosmith songs on it. A couple of them were new. They did do a little bit of a cheat, and they put Sweet Emotion on here. One of my favorite songs on this entire soundtrack is a Journey song. This was the first Journey song that was recorded and released after Steve Perry left the band, with the then lead singer, whose name was Steve Augeri, which I loved him. He had a great voice. He's not with the band anymore, but I thought it was just a fantastic song. Reservoir Dogs, which is amazing. It's a great soundtrack. That movie took place in the 90s, although a lot of that music was based out of the 70s. And then finally, Twister, which I thought maybe not the best top to bottom soundtrack, but featured the last really fucking great song that Van Halen recorded with Sammy Hagar, Humans Being, which is
Humans Being, yeah,
absolutely amazing. So I had to go through my collection of soundtracks just to kind of see what I had and what I was listening to at the time, and those are the ones I pulled up.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's funny. It's funny you brought that one up. That's an outstanding album. There's Goo Goo Dolls on there, Katie
Yeah, yeah,
Lang,
yeah.
Van Halen's on there. There's actually two Van Halen songs, if I remember correctly. There's like an instrumental one, right? Like
Correct.
something about the wind.
Respect the Wind by just
Respect the
Eddie
Wind.
and Alex. Yeah.
There's a Soul Asylum song on there that I don't think was on any other Soul Asylum album, and it's awesome. I love that one. Yeah, that was a great. I love that soundtrack for sure.
It's good. Yeah, it's
yeah.
really good. Shania
So
Twain's even on it, and I think
that's right.
This is before I think she got like mega popular.
Mega, yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, and Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. So
That's right.
a significant portion of Fleetwood Mac. But anyway, so that's
All
my
right.
little trip down memory lane. But I want to give you the honors to kick this off because I'm dying to know what's going to be on your list. So if you would, please.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, do you want me to start honorable mention, or do you want me to start with number 5?
No, start number 5. The honorable mention is always the fun one.
Okay. All right. So number 5, like I said, I kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. All of mine are from 1984, 1985, and 1986. So that kind of pigeonholes me a little bit.
Sure.
Not well, I pigeonholed myself. Like this was, I didn't do that on purpose. I just I made my list. So typically, I think I've talked about this on the podcast. Typically what I do is when we have these top 5s, I'll go and I'll just kind of rattle stuff off the top of my head. Maybe I'll go do some research and I start with a bigger list, and then I kind of whittle it down, and then I put them in order. I think I had on my initial list, I probably had 20, 18, 20, something like that. And then pretty quickly, though, I was able to get down to this 5. And just ironically enough, I noticed, oh shit, they're all from 3 years. 3 years. So yeah, this one is, and I'm going to, 1984, it's Prince's Purple Rain.
Ooh. Wow. I did not expect that to be on your list.
Really?
Yeah.
This album is one of those, and I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but like albums that you can put in and listen to from beginning to end and not skip a song and not get bored. Like that's most of the time that is a greatest hits album. Every once in a while there's like a stinker song here and there. Van Halen 5150 to me is like the one that kind of stands above all else, where you can literally listen to that stuff. But even on that one, there's a couple that I like less than others.
Sure.
Purple Rain, though, they're all by Prince. The movie, in my opinion, is not great. The music is way better than the movie. But I mean, you've got some absolutely iconic stuff here. Let's Go Crazy, Purple Rain, I Would Die for You, When Doves Cry. I mean, when you're thinking about Prince greatest hits, you're going to talk about a couple songs off of this album. Prince, in my mind, this is going to sound silly because he's kind of arguably up there on the if not Mount Rushmore of artists. He's in that conversation, but I still think he's underrated in terms of how good he was as a musician. He was a prolific writer. He played so many instruments. He was just an incredible artist. And this is one of those that I actually come back to often. Don't like the movie, but this soundtrack is awesome. I absolutely love Purple Rain 1984.
That's a really solid choice. In fact, it might or might not appear on my list at some point. I didn't know you were a Prince fan. I mean, I feel like I thought that I knew that you liked and respected him, but I had no idea that you actually actively listened to him.
Yeah, I would not call myself like a mega Prince fan. There's probably 3 or 4 albums that I listen to. This one I'll listen to, like I said, beginning to end. Is it Peaches and Cream, or I don't even know what the
Diamonds and Pearls.
Diamonds and Pearls, Peaches and Cream. So, yeah. See, I'm not a huge fan.
So you're not a diehard fan? Is that what you're saying?
But yeah, but there are a couple albums that, and again, to your point, always, I mean, utmost respect for him as an artist and as a musician. And I can totally hear and appreciate the, just how awesome he is as a musician. And this one, if I had to listen to one Prince album, this is the one.
Yeah. I mean, can't argue with it. It's it is a really great album. It's got songs like Let's Go Crazy, Darling Nikki, which is fantastic. Purple Rain, obviously that song I Would Die for You. I mean, absolutely amazing. Isn't When Doves Cry is
Yeah.
on here as well. So it's crazy how good and how insanely talented that man was.
So I've got a story about this soundtrack. So this album came out in 1984. So what were we? We were seven,
8.
8, right? So I wanted to get this album, and my my parents were not what you would call hip or cool. Like they, you know what I mean? Like so this movie came out and they had no idea who Prince was or anything like that. My dad was they were older, my parents were older, so they were still listening to the Beach Boys in the 50s and Elvis and the Beatles, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I remember my one of the neighbors on my street was a friend of my mom's, and my parents had bought me the Purple Rain album, the cassette, not an album, the cassette. And I remember this very vividly. She came over one afternoon. She was talking to my mom. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and I was listening to, that album. And she said, Donna, who's my mom, Donna, do you know the song Darling Nikki? And my mom was like, of course. No, what the fuck are you talking? I have no idea Well, long story short, once Judy, the neighbor, told my mom the content of the song Darling Nikki, what they did was she recorded a version of Purple Rain of that album without the Darling Nikki song. So she gave me a dubbed version of that. So I probably still have it, like the original OG cassette. So I've got
Okay.
out of the package, but it's a dubbed version without Darling Nikki on it.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, your neighbor was a bitch. That sucks. That's shitty, but I can understand that. And it's really funny that you sort of bring this story up because I had a very opposite experience that my mom growing up loved Prince. Like if he would have gotten close enough, she probably would have run away with him. Like she absolutely loved his music. My love for Prince is homage to, my mother. And she knew exactly what he was saying on every lyric, on every song, especially on Purple Rain and on 1999, because those cassette tapes were played on repeat in her Ford Mustang green drop top convertible that she had when we lived in Texas. And I'm reasonably sure outside of the song Purple Rain, I never got to hear anything else on that soundtrack because it's pretty graphic. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
even Prince's older stuff, there's some shit on those albums that people don't really listen to the lyrics as much because they're just listening to the music. But like Darling Nikki starts out like the first 4 lines of this song are, I knew a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine. Right. And so, like,
Yeah.
yeah, right there. It's like, yeah, maybe not appropriate for the 8-year-old boy's ears. I mean, but the 8-year-old boys wanted to consume that, I guarantee you.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
that's an amazingly solid choice, and I think that's a fantastic album.
all right. So I kicked us off. What do you got for your number 5, sir?
So my number five and my number four, but my number five is going to be sort of that same genre soundtrack specific thing that I was talking about, which is it's a movie that takes place at a certain time. I wouldn't call it a period piece because it's not a Jane Austen flick, but it takes place in a certain decade that is not near us. And it is full of music that I probably would never have been exposed to unless I had heard this soundtrack. And this is from 1997, which is my absolute latest on there. And it is the movie and the soundtrack for Boogie Nights,
Yeah.
which I think is fucking fantastic. Now, I am not a disco fan. I don't love disco. I don't love a lot of songs out of that era. But somehow, and I don't know if it was Paul Thomas Anderson who directed the movie, I don't know who was responsible for putting together this soundtrack, but somehow they managed to put together a series of really, really, really great songs that I will never be able to hear again for the rest of my life without thinking about Mark Wahlberg and his giant fake dong diving into a swimming pool, getting ready to go talk to John C. Riley and talk about Star Wars and tequila shots and all that stuff. Like it's so imprinted in my brain that way. I mean, you've got songs like Best of My Love by The Emotions. You've got Jungle Fever. You've got this song called Brand New Key by Melanie, who, a lot of one hit wonders, a lot of people who never really did a lot more than that. You've got Sister Christian by Night Ranger. You've got ELO on there. You've got the Beach Boys. I mean, it is so good. It is very Spill the Wine by Erik Burden and War. Like there's some really, really great songs on there that I think maybe one of the marks of a really good soundtrack is whenever you hear any of the songs, like boom, your mind goes right back into your body the last time that you saw that movie, and you can even remember the scene that the song is playing in when you're listening to the soundtrack. So that's my choice for my number five. It's and before I pass it back to you for your feedback. It does have, I believe, somewhere on the soundtrack. I'm looking at the track list now and I'm trying to find it, but it has Mark Wahlberg singing "The Touch," which was which to this day still makes me really. It's really bizarre that this was such an obscure song from the '80s that you and I both know, sung by Stan Bush in the Transformers movie. But where did this song come from? Why is Mark Wahlberg singing it in this movie? I have no idea. I think there's a clip of him singing it either on this or Volume 2. This is one of the two soundtracks on my list that actually was so popular, it got a Volume 2. It got a whole second soundtrack with a whole bunch of other new songs. And yeah, hearing Mark Wahlberg sing, "You Got the Touch" is so fucking classic. And I still don't know how that happened. Maybe future me got a time machine and went back in time and told Paul Thomas Anderson to put it in the movie. I don't know, but it was amazing and I loved it.
Yeah. So Mark Wahlberg, and I'm sure he does it on purpose, but he sings it really, really poorly in the movie. I mean, it's not good.
I'm reasonably sure he's a terrible singer because I saw the movie Rockstar, and I guarantee all of those vocals were overdubbed by other people.
That's true. Speaking of Rockstar, that has one of my all-time favorite songs in there. "Colorful" by The Verve.
Yeah.
Is a tune that he actually sings, or Wahlberg's character sings at the end of that song. Amazing. I actually really enjoy that movie. I know a lot of rock fans don't. I actually really enjoy that movie. But anyways, not on my list.
It's pretty good. And it's a decent soundtrack. They kind of pulled a Forrest Gump and pulled a lot of like greatest hits that randomly had nothing to do with it. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So it's funny. When I was talking about movies or soundtracks that I disqualified, Boogie Nights was one of them. And maybe it shouldn't have been. It certainly doesn't span nearly as much time as Forrest Gump did, because Forrest Gump was, I mean, probably what, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, if you include the time when he was younger. Boogie Nights though was another one where, if you're thinking about Jack, the Burt Reynolds character from when they started versus at the end of the film, spoiler alert, when he's like old and gray and kind of walking through the warehouse of his porn tapes, ironically enough. To me, that's what I thought about initially when I first thought about this, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a multi-decade piece, and they took songs not only from disco, but they took, you mentioned Night Ranger and those kind of things. So I disqualified it, but it was one of those, when I mentioned, my first draft of like off the top of my head, awesome soundtracks, Boogie Nights was on that list. So I couldn't agree with you more. Everything you said. I actually forgot, you mentioned The Touch. I actually forgot that was in there, and you're right. It was classic. The one thing that you really, I think, nailed was every song on this soundtrack, no matter where I know it from, I'm always thinking Boogie Nights when I hear it, like for
Yeah.
forever, especially Night Ranger, Sister Christian.
Yes, which I think
Yeah,
everybody knew before that
yeah,
iconic scene where that kid's blowing off those fireworks, and you've got Mark Wahlberg and John C. Riley and Thomas Jane, and they're sitting there on the couch, and this really intense moment, and then they pan to Mark Wahlberg, and he's just sort of got this 1,000-yard stare, and they
yeah,
leave the camera on him for like a good 30 to 45 seconds, and
yeah.
it's just like, what is going on here?
And that's
Um,
Alfred Molina too, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a
Yeah,
great call. Yeah,
yeah,
Alfred Molina is the one that's like he's all coked up and he's running around and they're listening to Jesse's Girl,
yeah.
which is not on, at least I don't know if it's on volume 2, but it's definitely not on volume 1. But your commentary is fair, and I guess I didn't think of it through a whole lot because I might have chosen not to put this on the list because you're right, doesn't span decades, but it's probably spans. I don't remember what year it's like it takes place, like what year it started, but they clearly went from the 70s to the 80s.
Yeah,
And there's a big sort of I'll call it a demarcation scene where it's like they have the party where it's New Year's Eve 1979 into 1980, and little Bill shoots himself, and like this big iconic scene in my opinion. And yeah, they do span a lot of time. I think maybe the reason I like this more is because they didn't go for super obvious songs. Like they
yeah.
didn't go with top 5 chart. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't know the 70s stuff. Yeah, I'm not really clear on how successful some of those songs were. So they were new to me. So I kind of felt
Sure.
like they were maybe less popular, but I'm not entirely sure. But
Okay.
that's good
No.
feedback. But still, I love every song there. All right. So your number 4, give me your number 4.
Number 4. So we're staying in 1984.
Okay.
Um, this is yeah. I don't really know how to introduce these.
Talk about the movie.
I was gonna say I certainly enjoyed this movie far more than I enjoyed Purple Rain. This is a movie that I have watched I won't say regularly. I've watched it, I don't know, several times. You and I have watched it together. We watched it in college. This is the one that put Kevin Bacon on the map. This is Footloose from 1984.
Nice.
Um, so I mean, when you're talking about the soundtrack here, first and foremost, you're talking Kenny Loggins, you're talking the title track Footloose. But then you've got stuff, Let's Hear It for the Boy, Denise Williams, which was a huge hit. You've got Almar's Paradise, which Ann Wilson from Heart and Mike Reno, who nobody really knows. You've got Bonnie Tyler. You've got Sammy Hagar, The Girl Gets Around. You've
Mhm.
got, this is one of those that there's some ballads in here. There's some super poppy stuff. This one to me is elevated because I really enjoyed the movie and where I was in my life. And that movie kind of really spoke to me. Again, not that I was a preacher's kid and not allowed to dance, but it was like, it was one of those kind of, excuse me. It was one of those kind of coming of age movies, that just kind of caught me at the right time of life. And those songs really are kind of ingrained in me. And I actually listened to this. I have this soundtrack, and I still listen to it with some sort of regularity. So yeah, 1984 is Footloose.
That's awesome. I mean, you and I have a very special connection to Footloose, and there's no way I could ever say a bad word about that. I mean, I'm pretty sure we danced to the title track many times in college, and most
Yes.
notably, certainly at my wedding, which I
Mhm.
made sure that happened. I think you and I were the only ones on the dance. I think the dance floor actually fucking
Cleared
parted
out.
like the Red Sea, not necessarily out of respect, but maybe partially out of fear, to allow us to dance. And I did my best Kevin Bacon impression, but no, this soundtrack is amazing. This is another one, and some of these conversations will go back to my mother because she kind of she started to form some of the things that I loved about music back in the 80s when these movies and these soundtracks were coming out. And she listened to this one on repeat, like constantly. And what's really funny about it to me is that as the years went on, and once I got to college, and once I got to know you, and I started to become a Van Halen fan, and then I realized, oh, Sammy Hagar's on this soundtrack. Uh, it sort of formed even an additional bond with my mom and I, because she's like, "Oh, I love this song," and I'm like, "Oh, it was a little creepy to know your mom loves a song called 'This Girl Gets Around,'" but um, she uh she loved that song, and it was really fun to sort of have that connection with her in that moment. And did you know that Sammy Hagar was this close to winning a Tony Award, because Footloose was a Broadway show for a while, and they
Oh,
adapted much of the soundtrack into the
yeah,
music of the Broadway show, and I believe Sammy's song was in there to some degree. And
nice.
if that had won a Tony Award, because Sammy wrote the song, Sammy would have been a Tony Award winning artist,
That's
which
awesome.
is fucking hilarious beyond all recognition.
That
But
is funny.
yes,
Yeah.
it is a great movie. It is a great soundtrack. Awesome pick. Well done.
Thank you. What do you got for number 4, sir?
So number 4 is a movie that I really like, but I do not revisit it very often. But I have to pay ultimate respect to the soundtrack because it was very popular when we were in college. It is the second soundtrack on my list that had a volume 2 because it was so popular. This was Dazed and Confused by Richard Linklater. He was the director of the
Yeah.
movie, but obviously. But this is another album that maybe more fairly has is a period piece that has a soundtrack that is contained within that period. It doesn't span decades. It doesn't even span uh, a weekend. It's all at the same time. But this has got songs by Rick Derringer, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, of course, Rick Derringer of Real American fame, uh, Alice Cooper, ZZ Top, Nazareth with Love Hurts, Ted Nugent, Cherry Bomb by the Runaways, Lowrider. This is probably, if memory serves, the first time I ever heard Tuesday's Gone by Leonard Skinner was from this soundtrack.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, Highway Star by Deep Purple, which is a phenomenally underrated song. Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss, which is obviously their most famous song. But the one that always takes me back to this movie, the one that I can never, ever hear the introduction of this song without hearing this movie, is Slow Ride by Foghat.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah.
yeah. Every time I hear that, I go back and I think of this movie. It's a fun movie. It meanders a lot, and it just sort of it just is, like there's not really a plot, there's not really a point, but it really takes you back to a time period where things were very different, and there's something kind of romantic about that. And the soundtrack does a spectacular job of complementing that movie, in my opinion.
It's a great movie. It's a great soundtrack. It's another one of those that, like Boogie Nights, when I hear a lot of those songs, I'm immediately transformed, right back into watching that movie, whether it was, in Bloomington or what have you. Yeah, I think you nailed it. I don't really have anything else to add. That's an awesome. It's funny. It's not one that I revisit often either, and it's not one that I listen. I don't even think I own that soundtrack, but I certainly know and have a lot of those songs kind of in my collection. Again, with the advent now of digital music, it's much easier to have kind of one song from one artist, in a playlist. So I have a lot of those songs kind of in my regular rotation. I don't have the playlist, but yeah, that's an awesome pick.
Yeah, I love that's one of the ones I don't, like I said, I don't revisit the movie a whole lot, but the songs always take me back to those moments in the movies, and what a cast. Like, so many great actors in that cast. And yeah, it's can't say enough about it.
For sure.
All right, give me we're at number 3. Gosh, we're
We're at
flying.
number.
Well, I don't
We're
know
at,
if we're flying. We're gabbing a lot, but that's what it's a fucking
yeah,
podcast. Of course we're gabbing.
it
So
is.
give me your number 3, please.
Number 3. So at this point, number 2 and number 3, number 1 was easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of immediate. Number 2 and number 3 have flip-flopped a couple times. In fact, as we were talking about the last film, I just flipped it again. So
Oh,
number three, yeah, number three was actually kind of already mentioned, at least uh, tangentially. This is from 1986. I don't think this one is going to show up on your list, but this one, the number one track on this one is by none other than Stan Bush. It's The Touch. This is the 1986 The Transformers animated, the movie, the original motion picture track from the Transformers.
love it.
Now,
Love it.
now, there's some, like, don't laugh if you're not a Transformers. Like, there's some pretty, like, hard metal, like, rock songs on here. Yeah, you've got The Touch, Stan Bush, but you've got a couple songs by Vince DiCola.
Yeah,
Death
he's
of Optimus
great.
Prime. Yeah, Death of Optimus Prime. You've got the Transformers theme itself. Dare to Be Stupid by none other than Weird Al Yankovic.
One of
And
my
there's another
heroes.
one by, yeah, and then there's another one by Vince DiCola called the Autobots and Decepticon Battle. I love this. This is one that I listen to with some regularity here. There's another one called Nothing's Gonna Stand in Our Way, and Dare is another one by Stan Bush that I absolutely
Yes.
love.
Yes.
These are those songs where you listen to a couple of these songs and they just kind of pump you up and they get you going. I was a swimmer in high school, and I put together a mixtape that I would listen to before every single meet to kind of get myself hyped up and get myself going. I would press play when I left my driveway, and I had it timed so that as I was headed towards school, headed to the pool, doing my warm up and my workout, the songs would just kind of continue to crescendo until kind of my first event. And my first event was directly preceded with Dare by Stan Bush off this album. And it's just like, to this day, Dare and The Touch just pump me up and get me going. And I know people will laugh at me because I'm a Transformers geek, but I love this soundtrack. It's awesome.
Hey, anything with Weird Al on it is
Yeah.
not something that I can, uh, you know, turn a deaf ear to. In fact, now I'm sort of remembering that Weird Al has his own soundtrack for UHF that I didn't put on here. Should at least be my honorable mention, but it wasn't. No, there's some really great songs on here. In fact, I've got a playlist for my weightlifting playlist, which sadly I've got to blow the dust off of. But it's got two songs on it that you would definitely appreciate. One is The Touch, and one is Dare. I have both of those songs on my exercise playlist because I think they're great and they're fun. And yeah, I mean they're cheesy as shit, but it's good to have them on there. It reminds me of a time of just being younger and really enjoying these movies. And Vince DiCola I think he's great. Like I don't know that he's done a whole lot. He was very much a part of another very reputable soundtrack that may or may not end up on somebody's list. I don't know. Rocky IV, which is arguably, I don't know. I don't know if it's arguable. I think it's easily the best soundtrack of the Rocky series, even though they have other songs and things. But yeah, I think this is great. It is really weird to see Weird Al on this soundtrack though,
Yeah.
with some
Yeah.
of these other songs. And I don't know how that happened. That had to be some sort of a studio. I don't remember what label he was on that maybe they just like, hey, we got to throw him in this movie or something. But it's hilarious. But yeah, I like that soundtrack. It's very
Yeah.
good. I remember you have owned this soundtrack on CD since
Yes.
college.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember. I think you bought it in college, probably when we lived
Might
together.
have. Might have. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
because
could be
you've
right.
had it
Yeah.
for a long time.
Long time. Yeah. All right, sir. What do you got for your number three?
Well, my number three is going to be a little underwhelming because you did already mention it, but it is Purple Rain from 1984. This actually might be the only soundtrack of a movie that I can't claim to have actually seen all the way through.
Yeah.
There are
It's not great.
yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, I don't. Well, first of all, it was an R-rated movie when I was young in 1984. I was not allowed to watch this movie. And then when I then when I did finally see this movie, I stopped it shortly after the nudity because nothing else was really interesting to me as a kid. Um, But I mean, as I mentioned before, Let's Go Crazy, Darling Nikki, Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, I Would Die For You. There are so many good songs on there. Prince was so hot in the 80s. Like everybody loved Prince. I mean, obviously Michael Jackson was the king of pop, but Prince was, I don't know, in my opinion, on a completely different level than Michael Jackson. Because he wasn't just a vocalist. He was an incredible musician. He was an incredible composer. He was an incredible weirdo by all accounts, but I mean, it felt justified because of how good his music was. And this soundtrack was nothing short of phenomenal, and it's something that I enjoy trying to revisit every chance I get. So yeah, 1984, Purple Rain.
Yeah, you mentioned when we were talking about Footloose, you mentioned your wedding. Another memory of your wedding that I have was later that evening, we went to the Bluebird and there was a Prince cover band playing,
Yep, I
and
do.
that guy was amazing. I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't know
he
who
was
that was.
me neither, but he
Good.
was really, really good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I talked about before. I love that song, or I love that album.
It is
Yeah,
so
great.
iconic, and
Yeah,
I think sometimes it is so good it sort of outshines the fact that it's a soundtrack. I
yeah.
think I don't think, I mean, people know it as a soundtrack, but it wouldn't surprise me if most people just thought it was an album because
Hmm.
it may be certainly on my list. It may be the prime example of a soundtrack that is better and more well known than the actual movie it came
Oh,
from.
yeah.
Like I
It,
can't think of a lot of examples of soundtracks that are super popular, but nobody really cared about the movie. This is the pinnacle.
this is
This
the
is
one.
the poster child of that.
Yeah, it is certainly the one on my list. My honorable mention, maybe, but yeah, absolutely. Of my top five, this is absolutely the one that outshines the movie for sure. Absolutely.
Nice, nice. All right, well, we're trucking through this. Give me your number two.
My number two, yeah. So, like I said, I was flip flopping between this and Transformers. This is 1986, which let's see, I believe, yeah, it actually makes it the newest of my top five in 1986. Let's see, I've already mentioned a couple of the artists on here. This is one where I think the movie outshines the soundtrack, even though the soundtrack is awesome. This is 1986's Top Gun.
Mm.
So you're talking about. I mentioned Kenny Loggins on Footloose. You got Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone. You've got Cheap Trick.
Ugh.
You've got Berlin, which is like not my favorite song, but that Take My Breath Away might be the most iconic or one of the most iconic songs from this album. You've got Miami Sound Machine. You've got Loverboy. You've got none other. And my favorite song on this album is by Harold Faltermeyer. It's the Top Gun anthem. Steve Stevens, who was also Billy Idol's guitar player.
Yep.
I mean, talk about an iconic riff, an iconic song. I absolutely love the Top Gun anthem, but this album is another one that I can listen to beginning from end. I was really glad that they brought back some of the beats and some of the songs into Top Gun Maverick, and yeah, I love the Top Gun soundtrack.
That's great. And I'm gonna go ahead and just let the let the air out of the balloon. That was my number two as well. So we
Nice,
actually
nice.
matched our number twos. Yeah, Top Gun is a yeah, iconic is the perfect word for this. This movie was huge in the 80s, and I think, I mean, it's probably fair to say, although I'm sure somebody would argue, Kenny Loggins was like the king of soundtracks back in the 80s. I mean, he was doing this. He did some songs off of Caddyshack. I mean, he had all kinds of stuff out there. And the Cheap Trick Mighty Wings song is one of my favorite Cheap Trick songs, which is interesting because I don't know if they don't like it or not, but my understanding is that they have never played it live, which is really curious, just because it's such a popular song. But some of the other songs on here, Lead Me On. I mean, some of them are really obscure, but I think they're really good. Like it's another one that it really takes you back into the middle of that movie. Loverboy's on here. Uh, it's funny you mentioned the Top Gun anthem. that I would have bet my life for many, many years that that was Eddie Van Halen playing on that. And I thought it was. I really did for the longest time. Just
So did I.
not
Yeah.
being a part of the liner notes. And Steve Stevens is obviously someone who is heavily influenced by Eddie Van Halen because it could have very well been him. But yeah, this is my number two. It's your number two. It is a fantastic fucking soundtrack. It is epic. It is iconic. It is very much in the zeitgeist of the 80s soundtracks. And then it came out with a couple expanded editions of it. So like they re-released it in 1999 and put a couple other songs on it that were in the movie, but didn't necessarily make the first cut, probably um, for financial reasons, I had to assume. But like Otis Redding's Dock of the Bay, Great Balls of Fire, Jerry Lee Lewis again, because I mentioned him on Stand By Me. And yeah, of course, You've Lost That Love and Feeling by the Righteous Brothers, which is a strange omission from the first version of the soundtrack, right? Because that's one
Yeah.
of the most, I mean, you can certainly argue Danger Zone is the most iconic song from Top Gun, but I would argue that You've Lost That Love and Feeling is the second most, if not a close second to Danger Zone.
Well, I mean, it's just a super iconic scene from that movie, right? You got
Mm-hmm.
Maverick and Goose doing their thing and to kind of woo Charlie, right? Yeah, I can only imagine that that was just a rights issue because I can't fathom an idea. I can't fathom the conversation where they would leave that off the album on, you know what I mean? Like that there's got to be something else going on there
It could
for
have been
sure.
rights, but I don't even know
Yeah,
if it was that. It could have just been like, I mean, I have to think that maybe they didn't know what they had. Like they had no idea that,
maybe.
that Top Gun was going to be this thing that was, I mean, Top Gun existed by itself for a very long time until the sequel eventually came just a couple years ago. And I don't know a lot of instances where a movie is that popular but never gets a sequel. Like a single movie that is that popular and never gets a sequel. Like there aren't a lot of them like that. And to have a soundtrack that is on par with the movie is pretty incredible. So maybe they just didn't know what they had. And I mean,
Maybe.
otherwise they would have licensed everything out of that movie as much as possible just to try to get as many dollars as they could.
Yeah, for sure. No, you might
Yeah.
be right. Yeah, you might be right.
So that was your number two. That
Yes.
was my number two. So we're
Yes.
going to skip right to number one. Now, I'm
Yes.
dying to know if we have the same one here. Before, I'm going to guess maybe we don't, but
Okay.
it's not going to surprise me if we do. So,
Okay.
especially given the very limited number of years that
Right.
you're working with here,
Yeah, I don't yeah.
it's very
Um
possible, but go for it. Give me, please,
yeah,
your number one favorite
m-
soundtrack.
my number one has actually already been mentioned on this podcast tonight. Um this is Rocky 4. Um
Oh, wow.
is that your number one too?
It is not my number
It's
one.
not. Okay. All right.
It is
Okay.
not.
So
But I love that I don't love that I spoiled it
yeah, no,
or
no. No,
called
you
it
nailed
out
it.
first. But
Yeah.
I think it's great that you brought it up. But please go ahead.
Yeah, so Rocky 4, I mean the Rocky franchise has some incredible music.
Hmm.
You get the Rocky theme here as well, but this to me is far and away the best soundtrack out of all of the Rocky films. I
Oh,
mean,
yes.
you've got Burning Heart by Survivor, you've got Hearts on Fire by John Cafferty, you've got Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, which I understand was in Rocky 2. Or maybe was it 2 or 3?
I believe that was
That
three.
was it
That was
3?
three.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Mr.
Um,
T.
you've got War again by Vince DiColo. You got Living in America by James Brown. No Easy
Hmm.
Way Out by Robert Tepper. One Way Street by Go West. The Sweetest Victory by Touch. And then in my mind, the greatest Rocky song ever is by none other than Vince DiColo. We mentioned it's the
The
training
training
montage.
montage. Oh,
It's the
it's
one
mind
where
blowing. Yes.
it's amazing. It is. I mean, I get goosebumps when I think about it. This is the one where Rocky is up in the hills, he's up in the mountains, he's running through the snow, and they're interplaying, Rocky going out in the middle of the woods, and then you've got Drago being shot up with steroids, and he's got the latest and greatest. And Rocky throughout this, he's growing a beard, he's picking up rocks, he's going old school, and it's amazing. It doesn't hurt that I absolutely love Rocky 4. It's my favorite Rocky movie of all the Rocky films as well. And yeah, I love this soundtrack. I listen to it still to this day. I listen to it regularly, and it's another one of those that I can put it on. I can listen to it from beginning to end. Yeah, Rocky 4. Absolutely. It's my favorite. Love it.
Yeah, it is really, really, really solid. It's not my number one, so we will not have a number one and number two in common, but it is a fantastic soundtrack that two of these songs are also on my workout playlist. Burning Heart by Survivor and the No Easy Way Out. God, that song is so good. So amazing. What's interesting to me, and this is just sort of a nerdy fact, that Survivor has two songs on here, Burning Heart and of course Eye of the Tiger. I don't know why Eye of the Tiger ended up on this because was it in the movie?
I don't think it was actually.
I don't
think it's in the
remember Eye
movie.
of the Tiger being in the
Yeah.
movie, but the interesting thing here is that Survivor has had a couple lead singers over the years, and the guy who sang Eye of the Tiger is not the guy who sang Burning Heart. Jimmy
Oh, is that right?
Jamison, yeah, Jimmy Jamison sang most of the popular Survivor songs that were not Eye of the Tiger. And
Okay.
he's passed away. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but Jimmy Jamison sang like I Can't Hold Back. He sang The Search Is Over. He sang High on You. You may not recognize all those titles, but Survivor was one of those bands where if you just play these, then you'll hear those and be like, oh gosh, yeah, I remember those. I remember hearing those on the radio at some point. They had a pretty high point in the 80s where they were hearing those. What's interesting is their label is Scotty Brothers, which is actually the same label that Weird Al was on. So maybe
Oh,
this and Vince DiCola and all of this is tying back to Transformers. I don't know. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, Rocky 4 was such a great soundtrack and easily the best one and very, very emblematic of the 80s, right? Like this album and this movie really felt like the 80s. When you listen to it now, you really kind of get transported back to that. So yeah, absolutely. Great pick.
yeah. Thank you. All right. So yours is not an overlap. What do you got for number one? I'm interested. I thought we might have had number one and number two as an overlap.
You know what? I thought we might have a little bit more too, but no, my number one is from 1985 and it is, oh gosh, I listened to this soundtrack so much when I was a kid and it's got some really great songs that and some really great artists on here, which is interesting. But just cutting right to it, it's Back to the Future. That was one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. The Power of Love by Huey Lewis is, nothing short of iconic. He's got another song called Back in Time, which is also pretty good. But I really like some of the other songs on this album, which maybe nobody else knows. There's a song called Time Bomb Town, which is by Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac. Eric Clapton has a song on here called Heaven is One Step Away, which I really like. And of course, it's got some of the older stuff, Earth Angel and Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, that kind of stuff. I love this soundtrack. And I think, and I'm cheating a little bit on this one, but one of the reasons I loved this soundtrack so much is that before I really understood how much I loved movie scores, this soundtrack had I think two different cuts. No, maybe just one. No, two cuts by Alan Silvestri, who did the music for this album, who famously has done a lot of albums, including The Avengers, which I know that we've talked about, Portals and all that. Alan Silvestri did the score for all three Back to the Future movies, and the Back to the Future overture that is on this is so incredibly powerful to me because it's almost like I don't think that piece is from a specific scene in the movie. I think the overture is maybe edited pieces of the score all just for one piece, because I don't know that they ever envisioned that they would release an entire score for this movie, but it is so good and it is so powerful and it is very moving. And my love for movie scores really, really kicked into high gear when I heard this, because I would listen to this. I would fast forward on my little Walkman to this song just to listen to it, and it was fantastic. And so what's interesting is when I did a little Google searching for, best soundtracks ever, I rarely found this listed on any of them. And I don't know, maybe I'm way off on this. Maybe this soundtrack wasn't a big one for a lot of people, but for me, it was the one that I listened to the most by far.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I didn't run across it either in my Googling, but I don't think you're wrong. I guess I would say that like you, I think I equate Back to the Future more to the score versus to the soundtrack, maybe with the exception of Power of Love. Um, but no, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think that's an amazing soundtrack. And yeah, and obviously, I mean, we've talked about Back to the Future 100 times on this podcast. It's an amazing movie.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I mean, it makes sense that one of your favorite films then has one of your
sure.
favorite soundtracks as well, for sure.
The
So
only thing that I am critical about as it relates to the soundtrack is there was a brief musical piece donated to this movie by one Edward Van Halen,
it's not on there, is it?
and it's not on the
Yeah,
fucking soundtrack, and that
yeah,
really pisses me off.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know where that music exists. I don't know if that's I should, as a Van Halen nerd, know if there's a larger version of that maybe exists in some other format. Certainly not on any of their albums, but maybe somewhere else. But yeah, there is a scene in the movie where Martin McFly puts a tape in and it says Eddie Van Halen, and that absolutely is Eddie Van Halen that is playing guitar. Probably Alex on drums too. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, that would have been a nice way to kind of complete it, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, doesn't happen.
All right. Well, that was a good list. We got some good
I
some
think
good
we did
soundtracks
great,
there. Yeah.
but we have honorable mentions. Oh, by the
Yes.
way, there's one more thing. We have honorable mentions. So I'm gonna ask you yours because mine's gonna be sort of not very climactic after your list, but tell me,
Okay.
what is your honorable mention for your top five favorite soundtracks?
This is the only one that is out of the 80s. It's the only one that's out of that 3-year period. This is one that to me the soundtrack far and away exceeds the movie. The movie's not bad, but it's not great by any stretch. This is this is a soundtrack that, like, to me is all about college for us, those college years. So it's grungy, it's like that sort of stuff. This is 1992 Singles. Um
Oh, that's a great pick.
yeah, you
I
know,
love that.
yeah, this is, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Chris Cornell, Paul
Paul
Westerberg, the
Westerberg, yeah.
Lovemongers, Mother Love Bone, Soundgarden, Mudhoney, Jimi Hendrix, the Screaming Trees, and the Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, if there's an album that isn't more grungy 1990s, I just don't know what it is. Some amazing songs on here. One of my all-time favorite Mother Love Bone songs called Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns. Mother Love Bone, if
Mm.
you're not familiar, is kind of effectively the precursor to Pearl Jam. It was Stone Gossard and it was their former band before they joined Pearl Jam.
Before Eddie
Um,
Vedder, I think it
yeah,
was. I
before Eddie
think it was
Vedder.
the
Yeah,
same band, wasn't it? Or maybe
it
not.
was it was with the exception of Eddie. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
it was the same
yeah,
band. Yeah,
right.
and then Wood with Alice in Chains. I'm a huge Alice in
Oh,
Chains fan. Dyslexic Heart. I mentioned Paul Westerberg. There's a great Zeppelin
hmm.
cover on here by the Lovemongers, The Battle of Evermore.
And you know who the
Um,
Lovemongers are, right?
I would have to Google it. I don't know off the top
It's
of my head
it's
now.
Anne and Nancy Wilson.
It
That's
is
Heart.
Heart, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Well, it's Anne and Nancy Wilson with a couple other musicians, so it's not Heart proper, but yes,
Okay.
it is. It is Anne and Nancy Wilson who
Yeah.
have a very strong attachment to that. Like to the Seattle grunge,
Yeah.
era.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, not an awesome movie. I mean, it's a movie I've seen I don't know, a half dozen times or whatever. But in my mind, the soundtrack far and away is way better than the movie.
Oh yeah, I mean I would agree with that. I would say it's a pretty popular movie for a subset of diehard grunge fans. I mean, I think that's probably fair to say. And of course, Eddie Vedder is in the movie, so you've got a lot of Pearl Jam. You've got Chris Cornell Seasons is on there. I'm surprised you didn't call that
Yep.
out. That is, in my opinion, the best song on that album. I think that song is absolutely phenomenal. But it's got Paul Westerberg is the lead singer from The Replacements, and they've got some really great songs. I love those guys. It's got some Jimi Hendrix, which is a little bit out of character, I think. It's got Billy Corgan on there. I mean, it's yeah, it's a phenomenal album. It's if you're a fan of 90s grunge, and I imagine at some point in our lives there will be sort of a resurgence of that, right? Like because with the 80s there's a resurgence of that, everything that goes away comes back, and I
Hmm.
imagine at some point grunge will come back, and there will be a new wave of people, probably teenagers, that listen to some of this music, whether it's Nirvana or Soundgarden or whoever, and really connect to this music. I think this soundtrack is really going to blow their minds. Like, I don't think this soundtrack is done having an impact on listeners out there. It just,
Yeah.
it's waiting for the next evolution of what's to come.
Yeah. It would. Yeah, that's a good point. It would not shock me to see this pop up again one of these days for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. What do you got?
Yeah, my honorable mention is going to be very underwhelming, so I'm sorry in advance, but it's Rocky Four, man. I put that
Yeah.
on my list, so
Yeah.
we talked at length about that already. It's my honorable mention. It's your number one, but Rocky Four, man, what a great soundtrack, and it's just it's one of those that it definitely does such a good job of complementing the movie that it's a part of. And I love some of the Survivor songs on there. I think they're great. And John Cafferty's Hearts on Fire, man, I mean, that just fires me up. It really does. And yeah, so I mean, I can't really say too much more about that. I'll ask you a question
Yeah.
rather than make a comment. Did you see any of the Creed movies?
I saw the first Creed movie, and I've seen bits and pieces on YouTube of everything else. I've not seen
Okay.
the other
I
movies.
was curious whether you watched Creed 2, which featured Michael B. Jordan's character of Apollo Creed's son versus
Drago's son.
Drago's son. And
Yeah.
there is a scene in there which I think could have been iconic. Maybe it wasn't, where Rocky and Drago square off. Not they don't square off, but they meet again and they have a
In the
conversation
restaurant.
in the
I've
restaurant.
seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
I,
seen that.
I thought it was a
Uh,
pretty good scene. I wished it could have been more, but I understand, I guess, why it wasn't. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I wasn't sure if
yeah.
you saw it.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually probably need to sit down and invest some time and go back to Rocky, just the franchise, and I would include Creed in that too, because
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of those movies that like I kind of stopped, like it's gonna sound weird. I kind of stopped paying attention after Rocky beat the shit out of Tommy Gunn. And I know
Oh,
that,
really?
and I know like Balboa was amazing, and I know Creed and the Creed
Did you
series.
see it though? Did you
I
see
did.
Balboa?
I
Okay.
did see Balboa. Yeah.
It was
Um,
amazing. It was
yeah, it was,
so good.
yeah. But I need to sit back down, because when I watched Balboa, I had watched it after it got all of the accolades, and it was one of those where it was one of those films where you hear nothing but amazing things about it, and you
Yeah.
go into it with like these elevated expectations, and no matter what you get, it's not going to live up to those expectations, right? And I need to
Mhm.
go back and watch it again with an with objective glasses on, and just kind of watch it for what it was. And I think I could probably, like, enough time has passed that I could probably go and do that now. And like I said, even Creed, I watched that first one and I enjoyed it. And I just never kind of got around to, what is there, three now? Three or four in the Creed series?
There are three, and in the third movie, he fights. I don't know if it's his brother or I don't remember what the relation is. I never saw the movie, but it's Jonathan
Okay.
Majors. It's
Yeah.
it's
Oh, that's
Kang.
right. Yeah.
He fights Kang. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, by all accounts, the Creed movies are really good. I've
Yeah.
only seen part of the first one. I've not seen anything else.
Okay.
It's one of those series that it's like, well, if Rocky's not going to be a prominent part of it, then it kind of takes I mean, I'm glad they call it Creed. It's not called Rocky 8 or
Right.
whatever, but it 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 doesn't resonate as much with me if Rocky's not in the movie, and he's not in the third movie. Like
Not at all.
I don't know if they
Okay.
I don't think they killed him. I don't know what they did with the character, but he's
Okay.
not in the third movie, but he's in Creed and he's in Creed 2, I believe.
Okay.
So
I know my mother-in-law absolutely loves that series, like loves the Creed
yeah,
series more than Rocky. She likes the Creed series. So she's been trying to get me to watch them, and I just haven't got around to it yet. So
yeah. But yeah, I think we'll see where it goes from here. I don't know,
yeah.
but Rocky 4, what a soundtrack! Can't say enough about it.
Awesome. Well, this was a fun list. I'm very glad that you texted me today. I'm very glad you came up with I mean, just like off the cuff, it wasn't something that we needed to do a ton of research on. Like I said, I was able to kind of put my list together in, I mean, 20 minutes it took me. So, and I don't, and I'm glad that we had some different stuff, but I don't think like there wasn't anything that came up that I was like, oh shit, I totally should have put that on my list. Like I'm pretty comfortable with my list.
Yeah, I would agree.
There wasn't anything that I really was like, oh, I totally forgot that one, which is good. But I'm also glad that we only had one overlap, which is good. So that's always exciting. I like to hear kind of differences of opinion and kind of see where we differ on
Yeah,
those kind of things.
yeah, this
So
was a good one for sure. I loved it.
so let's see, real quick, and then we can wrap it up. We got it's getting towards wrestling season here, right? The
Ooh,
Rumble's
it
coming up.
is. It
Um,
is.
and
Some
since
shit is brewing.
so the last time we talked, and I'm pretty sure it was on the last episode, we had a brief conversation, and I believe I mentioned the fact that we were talking about the Roman Reigns and how they were going to get the title off him. And I think I mentioned that the only way I could see that ending was to have The Rock come back.
Yep.
And sure enough,
Sure
since we
enough.
had that conversation, The Rock showed up on Monday Night Raw. They were in San Diego, I think, and among other things, just destroying Jinder Mahal in a promo.
Right.
As he's walking out of the arena, he mentions that he's going to go grab a bite to eat tonight. Should he sit at the bar? Should he sit at the table? Nope, he's going to sit at the head of the table, which
Right.
obviously is a nod to Roman Reigns. So I fully believe that that's where we're headed. I think that we're going to get that at WrestleMania. The real question in my mind is, do they get the title off Roman in between now and then? Do they take it off him at the Rumble? What does that look like? And we talked about it in the last podcast. It's the greatest time of the year to be a wrestling fan between
It is.
now and WrestleMania. And the fact that I don't know what's going to happen, I fucking love.
Yeah. I agree. I I'm really trying to figure out where I come down with all this because I love The Rock. I think he's great. He's the most enigmatic character that this business has ever had. But I don't love. So my gut reaction, my initial reaction is I don't love this. I don't want him coming back fighting Roman for the title in WrestleMania. Now, that may or may not be what actually happens. I would be surprised if they take the title off of him before WrestleMania because he's had it for so long. I feel like you got to make that a spectacle, right? Like if you're going to take the title off him at this point, you got to make it happen on the biggest show. And if you do that, it can't be The Rock. It just can't be. It doesn't make any sense to do that. So I'm curious to know where this is going. But as I think I mentioned on the last podcast, the one thing I love about this time of year and the one thing that I appreciate about the modern day WWE is that every time I think I know where they're going, I'm wrong. And they end up swerving me in a way that I may not always agree with, but I'm really happy to be wrong. I love going into a movie like I remember the Star Wars movies and thinking, "Oh, geez, I knew exactly where this is going to go," and I was wrong, and I was, it's interesting. The Last Jedi was like that. Like my first impression of The Last Jedi was, "Oh, I really liked it because nothing in there was what I expected." That soured on me a little bit after a while, but the idea of it just constantly surprising me is the best part about everything. And that's why the Royal Rumble is the greatest way to kick off this season, right? Because you've got this match where you have 30 guys that come in and out of that. There's no rhyme or reason for how they're going to work this one out. And I'm hopeful that it's going to be something that even I couldn't have put together. And if it is, then bravo.
Yeah. Yeah, so I imagine we will revisit and we will talk about wrestling over the next couple podcasts here. Like I said, I'm excited. I can't wait. I've got some travel coming up for work. I know you've got some family stuff, so we're not going to be able to get together for the Rumble, which is fine.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely trade texts and let's see, it's January 11th. I think the Rumble is the 27th, 28th, something like that.
27th.
Yeah, so we got what is it? Two weeks from next Saturday, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's coming, and then we are smack dab on the road to WrestleMania, which I can't wait.
It's going to be so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and John Cena is sitting right above me. He sits on my desk. So it's almost time.
I want to get him back to Indiana. If anything, I just want you to have an excuse to put him in your car and drive him over.
Drive him. I will gladly make that trip, my friend. I will gladly make that trip. All right. That being said, that's Mr. Pip. I'm Chewie. This has been the 411 from 406. We'll talk to you soon, folks. Later.
Adios.